Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Before we, get into it, I usually would tell people to tell us in the chat their names and, where they are joining from. So if you don't mind, I know someone did already, and, you can just tell us where your name and where you are joining us from today. And, yeah, again, thank you for joining this online conversation on the role of creatives in the conversation around the global climate crisis. I'm so excited to be joined today by Julia, the curatorial lead for the Africa Soft Power and Climate Change Photo Essay Prize, and storyteller and photographer Abubakar Sadiq Mustapha, whose work is currently on view at the Africa Center as part of the prize global exhibition tour. We all know that climate change is one of the most pressing issues facing our planet today. It's a complex and challenging issue, but it also demands our attention. And it's one of the reasons why we are here today to discuss and raise awareness about climate change and climate crisis. And also, we hope that at the end of this conversation, you'll be inspired to take actions in your respective countries and where you're joining us from today. And also, I would like to talk a little bit about what we do at the Africa Center. So the Africa Center is uniquely focused on a multidisciplinary approach to contemporary Africa and the continent's diaspora. With a mission encompassing policy, business, and culture, the Africa Center is committed to an integrated approach to understanding all aspects of the African continent, including transforming narratives. And before we move on, I would like Julia to tell us a bit about Africa's Soft Power and Climate Change Photo Essay Prize as the curatorial lead of this project. Julia.
Thanks, Favour. Thanks for having me. Just before I jump in, I just wanted to say that our other artist, Free, who is meant to be on this call today for unforeseen circumstances, is not able to join us. But we're still going to have a really great chat. So a bit about Africa Soft Power. It's all about mainstreaming African perspectives, and often these perspectives are unseen in the global context. And we live in a world where supply chains are, crossing links with things like climate change, and everything is interconnected. So it's really important, not just for Africans, but for the entire world, to have these very valuable perspectives. And the Africa Soft Power Climate Change Photo Essay Prize is a new prize. This is the first run of it, and it's all about propelling African creativity and amplifying African thought leadership in the global conversation around climate change. So that's putting African artists at the center of the conversation around climate change, looking at how the visual sector, the visual arts, can help improve climate literacy.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. I mean, from what you shared, I can see, a common commitment towards understanding, creating fresh and new perspective about African and African diaspora. I was just thinking if you, how do you think this kind of partnership, because between the Africa Soft Power and the Africa Center, how do you think this can really transform the narratives that we're talking about, especially regarding a topic like climate change? How do you envision? I know the exhibition has, gotten a lot of attention. People are sharing, people are talking about climate change, but thinking about collaboration and partnering between institutions, in Africa and also in diaspora, how do you think that this can really help in raising awareness about topical issues like climate change, and how to inspire people as well?
Yeah, I think, issues like this aren't just, they don't just affect one sector, they don't just affect one organization. So collaboration is key. We can each leverage our organization's strength. I'm seeing so many messages come in of different people joining from around the world. It's really exciting. People from Rwanda, people from Pennsylvania, people from New York. So and I'm calling in from London, and Sadiq's calling in from Nigeria. So we can see in real time how we're using that power of our two organizations together, we're able to reach more people. And that's a really important part about this collaboration, is that it's we're reaching larger audiences, and it's also because of the Africa Center's commitment to the African continent and Africa Soft Power's commitment to the African continent. We're empowering Africans to take action, to share their stories, and particularly when it comes to young creatives. So yeah, both organizations support young artists, champion young artists, and that's also at the center of this collaboration.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, from what you said now, it makes me really think about how organizations can, start approaching pressing issues on the continent and in diaspora, even globally, from a collaborative point of view, and seeing one another as partners, as collaborators, and not competitors, and that's how we can collectively address these issues. So it's not a problem for one organization or for one person or for certain people. It's a collective issue that requires joint effort. And I think that's one of the what makes the exhibition and this kind of collaboration a very powerful tool in addressing on this issue. And I'm going to be asking Sadiq how what it means to be a finalist for the prize. I know there was an open call. There were lot of it went through a process, selecting even the finalists and the winner and all of that. But in terms of like seeing your work in this kind of conversation and what the exhibition is about, climate change and all of that, what does it mean to you to have your work, being shown at the Africa Center? Do you think it's contributing something to, the conversation and what we're talking about today?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's evening in Nigeria, and I am live from Lafayette, Niger State, Nigeria. For me, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, for me, it actually meant a lot to me when I received an email that I was a finalist. I was excited. In fact, I had gone on to my creator, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, frustrated to God because I don't know. I was too excited. I knew that the work had a whole lot of potential, and I knew that I needed a medium that could take my work to a larger extent on a globally. And when I saw a call for entrance, I knew that if I'm shortlisted, my work will actually gonna travel around the world, and it actually did for me. I get people chat me up and be like, "Oh, are you Sadiq, the one whose work exhibited at Kenya, the one whose work exhibited in London, and the one whose work exhibited in Lagos, Nigeria?" So it has for me it has made me a kind of celebrity, and I am actually glad that I am a finalist, even though I wanted to win.
Yeah, I mean I get that, but in terms of I mean, you've received feedback, people have sent you messages and all of that. It feels good. I know how, what that looks like. But in terms of the work also, have you received feedback from these people talking about the impact the works, had on them? I know people have walked into the space and looking at the artworks, and the comments they've given are like they didn't know, so much is going on the continent, and they would really love to meet some of the artists and all of that. I was wondering if you got feedback that was specific about the impact the works had on the people.
Yes, I actually got impact from certain people in Nigeria, and I was told that someone said he never knew that flood was this bad in northern Nigeria, because my work actually focused on telling the climate resistant story of the northern Nigeria. He said he never knew that something like this is actually happening in northern Nigeria. But then my work had actually helped him understand the impact of climate-induced flood in northern Nigeria. And I understand why he thinks that, because what inspired this body of work was at a time when Jigawa was badly flooded, Jigawa State was badly flooded, Bauchi was badly flooded, and Kogi State in central northern Nigeria was also badly flooded. There were people leveraging social media in Kogi State, telling their stories. But then people in the far northern narratives in Jigawa and Bauchi, where my work was centered, weren't doing that. They were rather on Twitter dragging one drama Sauda, who is an actress, for dressing an improper way. So that was what inspired this body of work. I wanted to show the world that every year northern Nigeria is badly hit by flood, and farmer loses millions of naira.
Yeah, I mean, you are right. Sometimes people don't know the effect of, climate change in countries that are heavily, impacted by this issue. And yeah, one of the things that stood out for me in what you shared is how even media, people need to, channel platforms to really talk about pressing issues, as opposed to, just using it to gather attention or fame, or but like, if people can use like social media platforms to also draw attention on some of these issues, maybe we would have we would go far in addressing this topical issue. And that makes me that would, I think now I'm just going to ask Julia what you think, what role and what power does art and creatives and artists, like Sadiq, I know for you, being the curator of the exhibition, you had more time interacting with the artists and the work. What role do you think that artists, creatives generally play in conversations like this, both locally and also in global scene?
Yeah, I mean, as Sadiq is saying, that there were some people in Nigeria who didn't know how bad the flooding was in their own country. And, there's people around the world who don't know how bad the climate-induced flooding is. And we look at some of the other artworks in the exhibition, and there's, an artist from Togo, there's an artist from Rwanda, where we're showing the scale of climate change and the effects of it on the continent. And I think that also has a lot of global resonance. It's really talking about the value of soft power. So when we're looking at an art exhibition, you're like, okay, well, what does an art exhibition do? It normalizes the conversation. I think probably a lot of people feel like they don't have the language, or it's quite hard to talk about these big issues. And we're with something like an art exhibition, you're putting it up front and center in a language that people can understand, a visual language. And it's making people discuss it with each other, discuss it, hopefully with their politicians. I saw that, COP's starting, and there's talk this year of a loss and damage fund for countries that are disproportionately affected by climate change, but also don't contribute to climate change as much as many of the richer countries in the world. And so we actually that's a huge thing. There's never been talk of a loss and damage fund before. I mean, I'm sure the people out there who are familiar with this are like, well, we'll see how it actually happens, and if it happens by loans or by grants, and if it happens at all. But the fact that that's even something that's being talked about, that countries who are low and middle income could possibly basically get reparations in a best case scenario for the effects of the climate crisis. That's something that wasn't talked about 5 years ago. And I think so if we keep talking and keeping the conversation going, and we keep all voting in ways that are making our politicians realize that we care about this issue, then that's the power that the art then has change.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And, just from what you said, it makes me, think about ways we can, and this is, open to you and to Sadiq, if you want to share something about how we can reach everyday people and how we can raise awareness about climate change to everyday people who, are heavily contributing to climate crisis, like how do you talk to a taxi driver? How do you talk to a market seller? How do you talk to people you meet on the street who probably don't even have access to galleries to see some of this work, or people who think climate change is such a a big topic that doesn't relate to their locality or to who they are? How can we as creatives use the power? I know you touched based on this, how we can use the power of visual images and all of that to talk about climate change, but bringing it down to, maybe Sadiq will be able to also come in here, when you bring it down to your local environment, when you bring it down to like talking to maybe someone like my parents or someone like, old people, how do you explain climate change to them through artworks? I know, photography especially carries power, so much power to get people's emotions, get people to see and feel what you're talking about. But how else can we raise awareness about climate change to everyday people? Please feel free to answer however
Yeah, I think this climate change is actually a complex subject to actually discuss, and even as a visual artist, I think I actually find it hard to express some of these stories in the best way they should be. I feel so for me, I think that as a writer, I write, I do poetry, I do nonfiction, and I also do short stories. I've tried several kinds of writing to communicate climate change, but then I find it hard. I think the only easiest way I find it is through pictures, through photography. So for me, what I do is I go out and shoot climate affected societies, and all what I do is I don't even need to say anything. I just show it, and the guy I want to talk to just understand. Like I don't even have to use one single word to say. Like I have pictures in my portfolio where even without captioning those pictures, they already talk. Those pictures actually talk for themselves. And one thing is that I feel as curators, we need to extend our distribution plans. A whole lot of people do not have access to a whole lot of people do not have access to to galleries. I think my work is not really for those people. My work are for those people who do not have access to galleries, because I know that these people are making impact in making climate change severe. Like in my hometown where I'm currently talking from, in fact, a whole lot of people do not know what dropping refuse in our drainages can do. They don't actually know about those things. So I feel if they can have access to some of these pictures, they could understand the impact this has done. I know that my own hometown is yet to impact severely from climate-induced flooding. But then other societies around my home local government are severely impacting from this. So if they could have access to my pictures, like if we could have open exhibitions, if we could have these pictures or these stories published as pamphlets and they could be shared, I think they could see this impact and they could do a lot to prevent these things from happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. And
I think also
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, go.
I was just gonna say also I've seen Sadiq's work online, and you've written really beautiful words with your work, Sadiq, as well, because you are a writer. And I think, you know, for people who don't have access to galleries, having those resources online, and having, you know, a social media presence is the way a lot of people get information right now. And it's, you know, I think as creatives, it's a question always of how much time do we spend on social media? Is this the best use of our time? But when you can reach audiences who wouldn't normally be reached, who might not feel comfortable going in a gallery, you know, we're trying to break down like two barriers here. There might be a barrier to people feeling like they can talk about climate change, and there might be a barrier to people feeling like they can enter a gallery and that space is for them. And so it's up to us as the people who are working in the sector to make both of those spaces feel welcoming, because they should be. It should, you know, a gallery space, it should be home for everyone. I know the Africa Center definitely feels that way. You walk in and you're like immediately greeted by like wonderful smells of food in the restaurant where the exhibition is, and it just feels like a place where you want to be. And I think that's, you know, that's part of that whole process of breaking down these barriers and making it so that everyone feels comfortable and feels like they have a voice, because everyone deserves a voice. And
yeah.
I think I would like to add a bit story of what I encountered something during my field work in this body of work. I met a man in Jigawa State in a community called Baranda. It's a village under Jigawa State. He told me that their farms, for the last 60 years, their farms have never been flooded. But then he doesn't know why they have experienced such massive flooding this year. So you can see somebody in the village doesn't even know what is happening. So then when I understand that, okay, this is somebody who has who doesn't even understand that there is a change in the global climate. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean,
that's the story I wanted to share.
Okay, yeah, you know, that really speaks to how much work is still needed to raise awareness about climate change, especially in communities, in local communities, you know, where people are heavily impacted. Because sometimes people don't know why certain things are happening, why there's a change in temperature, why, you know, seasons are not looking like the way they used to be. And exactly, and I think that's one of the things I love about this the exhibition tour, out that, you know, from Kenya it moved to New York, and then to London, and then to Nigeria, you know. The Africa Soft Power has been able to reach more people. I mean, even at the Africa Center, we had people who traveled from Kenya telling us about the experience they had when they saw the works in Kenya. And then I'm sure some people who were also in New York who would travel to Lagos would, you know, seeing the works again kind of still puts the words out there in their faces, you know, emphasizing and re-emphasizing the impact of climate change. And it was what I was going to ask Julia about, you know, how can artists and creatives still get, you know, how can we get words out there, you know, how can we reach more people about this issue? How can we, Julia has mentioned social media, you know, you've also talked about breaking barriers, that, you know, in galleries, letting people know that the gallery space is a space for everyone, a space for all, you know, but thinking about maybe community-based programming that actually takes place in the community and outside the four walls of the gallery space. Say, for example, like having a talk, or, you know, a performance in the marketplace talking about climate change. I know artists have also like explored, you know, different mediums to talk about climate change, but from a curatorial perspective, how can curators work together with, you know, artists and creatives in order to drive change? such like this. If you have, something more to share about that, especially when it comes to the curatorial, the curator and artist kind of relationship outside the four walls of the gallery space.
Yeah, no, I think you're driving home an important point that it's up to us as creatives to often make those spaces. It's for if anyone on the call is able to give financial support, that's amazing. That allows creatives to be creatives. We need financial support from the government. We need financial support from art patrons. Often that's missing. And so where that's missing, we have to be even more innovative and even more creative. I think a lot of, especially young creatives, get really frustrated looking for opportunities. Right. And for us at Africa Soft Power, we decided we can make this opportunity. We can talk to people and make this happen so that we can create these spaces for creatives to show their work, for photographers to show their work that didn't exist before. And that same thing can happen anywhere between curators and artists, or in artist-led spaces. It doesn't have to be a gallery space, as you're saying, Favour. You can have a showing in your town center. Public artwork is an incredibly powerful tool. Often you receive a lot of comments with public artwork, and that's great. You're making people think. If someone doesn't necessarily like something at first, when they see it because they're confronted with it, they're thinking about it. So I think that there are these spaces for ways to make space for public artworks. There's ways to have conversations and have conversations among yourselves. I had a friend who was like starting is kind of like a book club, but it was not reading. So it was like we'd meet once a month, and it would be either watch a film or go to an exhibition or go to a park, and everyone would like review the park together. So there's ways that you can even do this with your friends and your very immediate community of your peers, that's allowing you to like be creative in a new way. So definitely take those opportunities. And again, self-marketing for young creatives is really important. Having a website or a social media that shows what your work is about, that helps curators discover you and to understand what your practice is. With Sadiq, it was great that there's this wonderful article on a website that has his photographs from this series showing the flooding in Nigeria and showing his words with it. That helped me as a curator to really understand where he was coming from and to understand what his work was about, because it was really, very clear. And then of course, the next thing you can do is if you are a young photographer, or if you know young photographers, is look out for the next edition of the Climate Change Photo Essay Prize. So it's open to young photographers from across the African continent and the global diaspora community, aged 18 to 30. And yeah, as Favour has said, this year, the Climate Change Photo Essay Prize has had exhibitions in Kenya, in New York, in London, and in Lagos. So yeah, your work can be shown around the world. The panel of judges is our top curators in the field, so that's also getting your work in front of those people. So I think it's really important to work with each other as well. So if you see an opportunity like this, don't hold it for yourself, share it with your friends too. Because as we kind of said at the beginning of this conversation, a big issue like climate change is only something we can tackle together. It's something that we have to be collaborative about. So right. Also your creative practice must be collaborative. It's no use competing with your friends who are great artists as well.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things that stood out for me from what you shared is how that sometimes people also need to create the opportunities or the platforms where they can also get their works out there, and also how to even look into like unconventional places where we can reach more people. And that like really makes, I want to also highlight where the exhibition is currently at the Africa Center. It's at Teranga, and for people who don't know, it's a West African restaurant. And I remember during the conversation we wanted to have the works we can reach more people. And, you know, for our restaurant, where we also use for, you know, pop-up exhibitions, we know, we're thinking of ways, you know, people are going to be visiting the restaurant during the weekend to spend time eating. And, you know, I was telling a friend that people spend more time looking at an artwork in a restaurant that they do at the museum or a gallery space, you know, because when you're walking into the gallery space, people just look up, oh, and then they're gone. But in a restaurant, you are compelled to sit, you know, as you're having your food, and you spend more time looking at the artwork. So, I mean, when you think about creative ways of presenting, you know, artworks to people and as a way to reach more people, this is a very good example. And thank you for that contribution from both Julia and Sadiq. I, you know, think at this point we can open up the floor for people to ask questions, and we can take questions at this point. But really, that was great. And when we think about funding and, you know, looking for opportunities to really enhance African artists' work, this is also a very good example. You know, the open call, and then the collaboration that we spoke about, and how artists also need to share opportunities with themselves. But if people have questions, you can drop in the chat, or
I have a question for Sadiq, actually. I was wondering, Sadiq, if you could tell us a bit more about how you told us about one conversation that you had with a farmer who didn't realize why his field was flooding. But I think it's interesting that you basically are creating portraits and they're posed portraits, and kind of what the process is behind that, how you find the people where they stand, if you place them, if they choose where they stand, how.
Okay, so this is what since I went with the water, that is the name of my body of work that explores the pensive visual narration of communities emerging from flood. What I wanted to do with the story in the beginning was I wanted to tell the story through an eye of an individual in order to create a collective climate resistant story. Because I felt when I went to the field to document this story, what I realized was that these loss were first personal before they are collective. Before this loss become a societal thing, first it is a personal thing. So I had to look at the story through individuals, and I had to do them in places where they have lost. That is why sometimes you see some of these portraits are in the farm, and that is why most of them are actually portraitures and not landscape, or there are few of people. For me, what I did was, first, I tried to understand their stories because I had to live with them for days. I spent like 2 weeks traveling between Bauchi State and Jigawa State in northern Nigeria, and then afterwards I did Niger, my own home state. So at first I had to understand their stories. I had to live with them because I actually understood their stories. It was easier for me to actually convey the stories virtually. That is why I placed all of them in where I wanted them to be placed. Like the farmer, I placed them in all the positions I wanted them to be placed. But then, like those women, the picture of those women who were returning from an IDP camp to their community in Geron Kuka, I didn't place them. That was where I saw them. I was actually on a pickup. I took the story. I was on a pickup. I know that you know a pickup. Favour should know a pickup, but I don't know that Juliana should know a pickup. I was actually on a pickup.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, a car. I was actually on top of a car when I took that picture. I knew if I had not taken that picture at that moment, then there was no way I could actually recreate these pictures. So I positioned them in the best way I think they can tell the stories I wanted them to tell. So have I answered your question well?
Julia?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because it's, from just a viewer's perspective, you don't necessarily, think about that, and you having kind of helped pose or place some of them, and some of them just being people just being exactly where they are. No, it's really interesting. I'm always interested in photographers' processes.
Yes, and one thing again is I feel since I went with the water is one of the hardest jobs I've ever done. Now, why it is hard is I had gone to the field 44 days after the flood. Like, so ordinarily there wouldn't be much stories to tell because the waters are actually receding. So I had to think of ways, okay, what ways could I do this that people could actually relate, people could see these stories, even people could understand the stories even without an attached word. So it was hard. And what made it hard for me was that I had to travel in there was bad road network because the flood had cut most of the roads. Like the roads were cut off by the flood. So there wasn't access by car. You couldn't move to these communities with car. So some of these communities I had to trek for hours. Like I remember I had to trek to a community for 3 hours. There was a community that I had to enter a canoe without engine. I had to sail on a canoe to access that community. There were communities where I had to access with bikes. I had to rent bikes. I had to rent canoes to be able to access this community. What was more painful for me was after this documentation, there is this NEMA, the Emergency Response of Nigeria, said that we were supposed to care for these people, said they could not access these communities, which was a lie. I, as an individual, in fact, this trip was self-sponsored. I sponsored this trip by myself from my own savings and then from the money I received from my dad and my sister. It was later on human good came in. So as an individual, if I could access more than 50 communities with a small budget, why couldn't NEMA, a government agency that is responsible to care for these people, that is responsible to care for these people, lie that they couldn't access it? All this were lies. So it pained me so badly that I could access and then NEMA couldn't access. Another painful part of this story is that some of these state emergency response who reached to these people didn't even give them. In fact, the relief they got was so little. How can you give somebody who has lost a whole farm a mosquito coil? How can you give a whole family who has lost their food storage, their farm, their house? How can you give them 2 modules of rice? So like hearing these stories for me, hearing these stories actually broke my heart. Actually broke my heart and showed me how serious the Nigerian government is. And another thing again about this body of work is I was traumatized after with the stories I learned, with the stories I had, and with the stories I documented. I was traumatized. It took me time to actually recover from that. In fact, I kept doing my younger brother would tell me that I kept calling people's names. I kept calling people's names during sleep. Like so, it took me time. It took time for me to let go of this story. Aside that, I think during this trip, I actually broke a lens that is worth $500,000. Like I broke a lens. I fell down during this trip. That was in Bauchi. I fell down and I broke a lens. I remember again during this trip, somewhere in Niger, I also fell down and broke a hand. So those are my experiences during the field work. So creating this body of work actually took a lot from me. It took a lot from me, psychologically and physically and financially, because everything I had, I put it to travel to actually build this body of work.
Wow. I mean, even right now, I could hear, the disappointment and the frustration in your voice, and yeah, I wish our government can do better, and I wish people also can, organizations and all of that can do better. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. We have more question in the chat. How can school children be involved in creative storytelling about climate change, especially using photography? Julia, do you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think there's really beautiful ways to teach children about photography and about being responsible guardians of our environment and of our climate. Especially if I don't know if you're a teacher, but there's inexpensive ways to do photography for children. So you could do like camera obscura, where they make cameras out of boxes. So that's a nice way that they don't have to have a camera. They don't even have to have a phone with a camera. But also a lot of school children do have phones. So if they have phones, they can use that as well. And I think that it's not necessarily saying, it's different to tell an artist like Sadiq or anyone in the open call, give us artistic photographs, give us fine art photography about climate change. For school children, you can say, go out and photograph something in the natural environment that you find beautiful. That's making them think about the environment. You can say, go out and photograph something that has to do with the weather. And then suddenly they're thinking about weather patterns. So yeah, I don't think it has to be as explicit depending on the age of the children. There's ways that we shouldn't guard children from the truth. We should be honest with them. But there's also ways that are age appropriate for getting kids to think about how they can use visual language to talk about their environment and the climate and big issues.
Thank you. Yes, and I also think that schools now, or even education, Ministry of Education or Department of Education, depending on what names they are being called in different countries, need to start taking accountability for how they've not been helping in teaching children about climate change. I mean, I feel at this point topics like this need to be like incorporated into school curriculums. Children needs to be taught in innovative and not scary ways, because that's another thing. We don't want to tell them everyone is going to die in here. We want them to really be able to learn about climate change in innovative, interactive, and creative ways. And yes, photography, like Julia give examples, can be a very good way to get them to start taking action. And one other thing I would like to say is children learn mostly also from observing. They see what adults are doing, they see when you throw trash on the ground, they see if you if you are being climate conscious or environmental conscious in how you do things. And gradually they are learning just by observing how adults are doing things. So I think also if we as adults are really environmental responsible, if we take responsibility and are really climate conscious in how we do things, children will start learning and gradually start putting into practice what they've observed us doing. Someone asked if Sadiq can share a particular story of any of his characters that he can't stop thinking about. I know he shared something related to his experience, which I know that was.
But then I could share. I have two of my favorite characters during my documentation of things that went with the water. There's a particular picture I can't stop thinking of, and that is a picture of a woman inside Juliana, can you remember me the title of that work? That woman that was
the woman that was inside the ruin of a house.
Yes, inside a ruined house.
Yeah.
Yes, inside the ruined house. I have a thing for that picture because I love the picture. I love the story. Now is the woman in that image didn't believe that there would be victims of climate-induced flooding. They had their neighbors, their homes were falling down. She didn't think that theirs would fall down. And then the next morning, they woke up to a collapsed house. So she has a co-wife. The husband has two wives, herself and then the other woman. So the husband told both of them to go to their communities. I think their own communities were not affected by the flood. But then the woman said, no, I am not going. If I go, I will miss you. And so that was why I love that. So she couldn't leave her husband. She couldn't leave her husband because she feels if she moves to her community, she wouldn't see her husband for this, and then she'll love, and then she'll miss her husband. And another thing again is that they had to live outside. In fact, they stayed for 44 days because I went to the village 44 days after the flood. That means since when their house collapsed, they were sleeping outside. For 44 days, she and other women were sleeping outside. That means they were exposed to a whole lot of harm. They could be raped, they could be attacked. A whole lot of things can happen to them. Then there's another story of a man from Amarai. I met him at a bridge. I didn't document his farm. I met him at a bridge in Baranda. He's from Amarai. I saw him with an axe and a wheelbarrow. He told me that he has not eaten for the last 2 days, that everything he had, the flood took it away, his farmland, his storage house, that he's left with nothing, that he came outside so that he could fetch some wood and sell, like cut some wood, because a whole lot of Nigerian homes depend on the wood for domestic fuel. So he comes out so he could get some wood, cut some wood, and sell them. In fact, that man is almost my daddy's age. My dad is retired and enjoying his life. I pictured him. That man should be like my father. He should be home, retired, earning pension, and watching TV with his grandchildren. But then he was outside fetching firewood so his family could eat. Man, so his story broke my heart. In fact, even yesterday, I had to share the picture with a friend of mine.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about flood and impact of climate change, I think one of the biggest issue is also displacement. How people are displaced all over because their communities were affected by climate change, and these are not things people are prepared for. Before it happens, and I think that is one of the reasons why we decided to have this conversation, like how do you prepare people for the felt level of climate change, and yes, it's really sad, and it's what impacts people. Someone has a question for Julia. In what ways can your organization equally empower young Africans to hold leaders accountable? Yeah, speaking of accountability on climate issues, it is one thing to tell this story, and it is entirely a different thing for Nigerian leaders to take responsibility for resources. I know Julia might not be familiar with the Nigerian context or the Nigerian political system, but I know also that Sadiq, mentioned these frustrations with excuses that some of these governmental organizations were given, the inability to access places that he was able to go with his own funds and personally. And I think I can maybe touch based on that, and Julia, maybe from what can also add something, and Sadi can also talk about that since his work is heavily on in Nigeria, focused on Nigeria. Yes, I think, yes, speaking about accountability, we need to start taking our government accountable. We can actually start by, inviting them. Hopefully they come for some of these exhibitions. Also doing public programming or public exhibitions that they can have, that they would have access to, because it's another thing to invite them. It's something different for them to come. Also, like Julia mentioned, using social media, everyone, not everyone, but people, use social media for things, maybe like using platforms that we know that they are on and tagging them, like making a post about what is going on in a state in Nigeria, and then tagging the governor. I know they also now have social media platforms that they use in promoting their governmental work. So we can start, using social media. I know social media is, a very good tool that we can use. It has power. We can use that to call them out, and everyone sees it, and there is no control over what you share and how you share it. Even though I know Nigerian government is known for controlling what people share and how they share it. But yes, I think that we can start with that, and also looking for ways to bring them in. So when we think about collaborating, when we think about getting people to be part of a conversation, I would suggest, bringing them in as people to empower, because people in government, they like fame, they like anything that has their name on it, like, oh, we want you to sponsor this exhibition on climate change, and that gets them excited, right? But eventually we need them to know that we are calling them out to take responsibility for some of the things that they also contribute to. And I don't know if there is like a last wrap up statement or comment from Julia and Sadiq as we wrap up the session.
Yeah, just to kind of go off of what you were just saying, it's not just leaders in Nigeria. I mean, the US is the worst in upholding its financial commitments to wait, I've got my wording, to delivering climate finances. So yeah, it's not just Nigerian governments, it's all around the world. And I think, there's a lot of discussion about how useful is discussion. And I think, at a certain point, like, there needs to be action, but action only happens when we can actually talk about things first and we know how to act. So having these types of conversations is important, and finding ways to hold our politicians and our governments accountable, using our vote powerfully, and making sure that this is an issue that we show our politicians that we're voting on and that we care about. And then in terms of, I think part of the question too was about how Africa's soft power can empower young Africans. So we're not just the climate change photo essay prize, that's the part that I work on. We also hold a conference it's been in Kigali the past 2 years in Rwanda, that has a great youth following that comes to it, but also huge world leaders from across the African continent come to this conference. It's really exciting. It's in May. So I would say, kind of as a last kind of plugging Africa Soft Power, make sure you follow Africa Soft Power on social media across our platforms. You can sign up to our newsletter on our website, and that newsletter will share things like our conference in Kigali in the spring. And it will also share the next edition of the Climate Change Photo Essay Prize. So we have lots of projects, lots of activities. Africa Soft Power does tons of panel discussions and talks, and has a really wonderful range of friends that join us for this. So we'd love to count you among those friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Favour?
Yes, I can hear you, but we need to actually like wrap up.
Okay. The thing is, I have there's a second part to things that went into water, and I think it's coming out next year, like in January.
Nice.
What I try to do this time is I'm trying to look at I'm actually a trained geologist, and currently doing my second degree in petroleum geology. So what I did with the second part of the work is I'm looking at how climate change is affecting geological records in the Upper Benue Trough. So I can't wait to share the work in January.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If you want to access this recording later after this conversation, you can visit our YouTube page at the Africa Center. You can also visit our website. You can subscribe and follow our social media platforms. And also you can follow the Africa Soft Power on social media at the Africa Soft Power. We have programs and conversations, on topical issues that affect us all. And, this is one of such programs. Thank you again for joining us today. And we hope that you stay tuned for our upcoming programs. And thank you, Sadiq, for, awesome conversation. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone that joined. Thank you, everyone, for interacting in the comment session as well.
And thank you, Favour, for helping us make this exhibition possible at the Africa Center, and to Sadiq for letting us show your wonderful work. Really looking forward to seeing that series in January. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.